My son's sister told the whole school a secret that should never be told, and now he's cutting her out and going no contact forever. I'm at the end of my rope and desperate for some input. My wife and I have David, 17M, and Dana, 14F. They have never been overly close siblings, but weren't sworn enemies either. Just two different kids with two different personalities, but as long as everyone was respectful, that was okay with me. When David was 10, he was the victim of abuse by a family member that saw them convicted and go to jail. He was in intensive therapy for years, and we are so proud of the strong, confident, and intelligent young man he is today. He has always, however, been very private about it. Besides our family, his lifelong best friend and their parents knew, and that was it. My daughter, however, knew about it too. She flippantly told some friends about it 2 months ago, and before you know it, the whole school knew. David was devastated to say the least. He's been back in counseling since and has been coping as well as possible. This counseling has come at a financially really tough time for us and is obviously worth every penny, but the fact that we can't afford more counseling factors into the other part of this. David blew up at Dana when this first happened, and she saw the fallout of him coping with this firsthand. But since that night where he found out she told people and word was going around, he hasn't spoken a word to her. He doesn't look at her when she enters a room or react when she speaks directly to him or about him or anything else of the sort. For example, at dinner, he'll speak to us and she'll chime in and he continues the conversation as though she hadn't said anything. Dana has tried daily to talk to him and apologized, begged, pleaded, and cried, and it's always the same. He'll usually crack a book or look at his phone, put some AirPods in, and ignore her completely. He won't discuss it with me besides to say that she's dead to him, and he has no intention of ever seeing or speaking to her again when he moves out in 10 months, and he hasn't wavered even a bit in that sentiment since. I'm at a complete loss. Dana is on total lockdown. She's lost her phone, video games, any sort of privilege or ability to do things with friends. She essentially goes to school, comes home, does her homework, and goes to bed, and she knows we are devastated and beyond disappointed. I believe she's sincerely sorry and contrite. She's broken down crying and apologizing to us more times than I can count. I'm unsure of how to proceed. We can't afford family counseling, and David's personal counselor won't talk to me about what he says to her about any of this besides to say not to push him on anything. I know he has every right to be furious, but at the same time, I can't help but feel like it's also not mentally healthy for my daughter to be treated as though she literally doesn't exist in her home for the next year. I know it's a natural consequence, but it's gut-wrenching to see and be living with. Not to mention, as a dad, I don't want my kids to be permanently estranged. It breaks my heart. Has anyone else experienced anything even in the ballpark of this that could offer any advice? Update. I want to thank people for the advice, some of it harsh but necessary. Unfortunately, things have not gotten better. My daughter's grounding came to an end, and she got supervised access to her phone, video games, and friends back. My son was livid with us about it, and no amount of explanation that continual punishment for a year wasn't an option made that understandable to him. I get that from his point of view, but it began to strain his relationship with me and his mom too. He still ignored my daughter and she still cried and was depressed over it. I booked 3 sessions of expensive family counseling and made him come, but he just kept his earbuds on with music playing the entire time. He turned 18 in January. My daughter dipped into her savings to get him a watch. I gave it to him and told him it was from her after he opened it, and he threw it away. Within a few days, he had moved out and into his best friend's parents' house without telling us he was going to. I invited him home for Easter, and he didn't come because his sister, who had nowhere else to go, would be here. I'm still at a loss. His graduation is next week, and we weren't formally invited by him. We basically got an "I guess you can come" when I asked. My daughter obviously isn't invited, and she's still struggling mentally with all of this. Therapy and medication haven't helped much, but our options of what we can afford are very limited. Has anyone been here? I never dreamed of having children estranged from each other and a son who pulled away from us over his sister's idiotic mistake. Relevant comments. I think you need to understand that your son is under no obligation to ever forgive his sister. What he went through as a child is something most people never fully recover from and then was violated in another way by his own sister. A very personal part of his story was shared without his consent, and that's never going to be okay. If a friend of his did this, most people would say to cut that friend out of your life. It's unfortunate that it's his sister and has an impact on the entire family, but your daughter made a mistake and has to deal with the consequences of her actions. For the record, I generally am against the whole cut them out of your life forever line of thinking, but in this case, it isn't your call. You don't get to tell him he has to forgive her. You don't get to decide when he should be over it. He is traumatized and has to do whatever he can to heal, including not being around someone who added to his trauma and made his life harder. I get wanting your kids to be close. I am currently on a road trip with my 2 kids to drop the eldest off for a summer internship and love the bond my kids have with each other, but they would never do something your daughter did. They know personal things about each other that no one else knows and are going to keep it that way. That's what siblings do. Your daughter messed that up, not your son, so don't put the blame on him.